Why was she the only one who noticed the wind shift? The others kept talking, heads bent over the flickering map, arguing about entry points and fallback routes. But Elena Vasquez, call sign Wraith, stood near the open hangar door, watching a dust devil rise and collapse on itself in the Afghan dusk. The air tasted different now, sharper. A change like that meant something was coming. She'd learned to trust small things. A bird's sudden flight, a door creaking once too often, a breeze that felt out of season. She tightened the strap on her pack, her fingers trembling just enough for her to notice. Not fear exactly, anticipation, maybe both. She hated that her hands gave her away, even when her face stayed still. Behind her, Lieutenant Grady's voice cut through the chatter. "Vasquez, you're quiet. You got a thought or just waiting for us to beg for your wisdom?" A couple of the guys chuckled, light, harmless on the surface. But there was an edge under it, the kind that made her throat tighten. She turned slowly, eyes adjusting to the hangar's dim light. "I think you're all underestimating the approach ridge. Too many blind corners. And you're trusting old intel on the village. If they moved heavy weapons in the last week." She let the sentence hang. Silence stretched. One of the younger corporals shifted uncomfortably. Grady sighed. "You always see ghosts where there aren't any." She almost smiled at the irony. Wraith. Ghost. It wasn't the first time they'd dismissed her instincts, and it wouldn't be the first time they'd need them. But there was something she hadn't told them. Not yet. She felt the folded photograph in her chest pocket, creased so many times the edges had gone white. Her younger brother, Daniel, all grin and promise. He'd been stationed near this same valley 2 years ago, the night the comms went dark and his unit vanished in the storm. Officially, it was chalked up to an ambush, an unlucky moment in an ugly war. But Elena had spent 2 years combing whispers and fragments, a map of rumors burned into her memory. Tonight's mission, just a routine recon, they said, was in the same corridor where Daniel disappeared. She wasn't here just for recon. A sudden clang of metal snapped her attention back. A mechanic dropped a wrench and cursed under his breath. Outside, the sky was deepening, a pale gold fading to bruised purple. Helicopter blades waited, still and patient. She inhaled, slow and deliberate. The air carried the faint scent of kerosene and sand, the kind that sticks in your throat. Somewhere far off, a muezzin's call floated through the valley, distant and haunting. Her mind flickered back. Daniel at 16, balancing on the roof of their parents' house in New Mexico, pretending to be a paratrooper. She yelled at him to come down before he broke his neck. He'd laughed, said, "One day you're gonna need me on a rooftop, Lena." He'd been wrong, or maybe not. "Mount up," Grady barked. She fell into step behind the others, the weight of her suppressed rifle pressing against her shoulder. The helicopter's turbines whined to life, a sound that always stirred something complicated in her chest, freedom and dread tangled together. As they lifted off, the base lights shrank below, scattered like fallen stars on dark sand. Elena kept her gaze fixed on the horizon. The ridge line was a jagged scar against the fading light, and beyond it the valley waited, silent, patient, like a predator holding its breath. She didn't join the small talk on the comms. Instead, she closed her eyes for a heartbeat, feeling the thump of the rotor blades through her bones. She thought of Daniel's last voicemail. "If anything ever happens, don't believe everything they tell you." The pilot, Captain Rizab, broke the silence. "Winds picking up, might be a rough set-down." His tone was casual, but his grip on the cyclic was just a little too tight. Elena opened her eyes. The darkness below seemed to shift. A farmhouse light blinked once, then again, too deliberate, too timed. A signal, or just her nerves twisting shadows into threats. She leaned forward to peer through the window, heart drumming. "Captain, hold 10 seconds. That light pattern, did you see?" Before she could finish, Grady's voice cut in, annoyed. "Vasquez, it's a farmhouse. Farmers use lights. Relax." But she couldn't shake the feeling. When they landed on the scrub plateau, dust spiraled up, coating their boots. The air was colder now, the kind of cold that seeps under your armor. Elena scanned the ridge, too quiet. Even the crickets seemed to have abandoned the night. They advanced on foot, boots crunching softly on loose rock. The moon, thin and sharp, barely lit the path. Grady led, two corporals followed, and Elena brought up the rear, eyes constantly moving. She felt the mountain breathing around them, the echo of small rocks dislodged by something unseen. Halfway down the ridge, a faint metallic click froze her mid-step. It wasn't theirs. She raised a fist. Stop. The line halted. Her pulse hammered in her ears. A second click, then silence. Grady whispered harshly, "What now?" She scanned the shadows, every nerve alive. Something here. A faint breeze carried a new scent, burnt cordite, old and ghostly. Memories flared. Daniel's unit, the after-action photos she wasn't supposed to see, the cratered ground. Then a glimmer, a single reflection on metal low and left, sniper scope, or just a shard of rock. She exhaled slowly, then crouched, her body aligning with years of training. Through her own scope, she swept the ridge opposite. Nothing, just jagged stone and a lonely juniper bush, but the feeling wouldn't leave. The team pressed forward again. The village was a cluster of dark shapes below, roofs like broken teeth against the sand. A dog barked once, distant, then nothing. As they approached the outskirts, a child's bicycle lay half buried in dust, tires deflated, chain rusted, abandoned long ago or recently, she couldn't tell. They split into pairs to check the huts. Elena stayed outside, covering their movement. The wind hissed through broken windows, carrying whispers of old laughter and forgotten lives. A radio crackled, Corporal Danner's voice tight, "Empty, too empty." Her gut twisted. A faint echo, boot on stone behind her. She spun, rifle ready, but saw only shadows. Then a whisper in her earpiece. Not Danner, not Grady, a voice she didn't recognize. A single word, low and almost tender, "Wraith." Her breath caught. She turned in a slow circle, scanning, searching. Nothing. "Check your channels," Grady hissed. "Who's on this frequency?" No answer, just static. Her heart thudded hard. Someone knew her name, someone knew her call sign. She remembered Daniel's warning. Don't believe everything they tell you. Suddenly, a flare burst overhead, bathing the village in harsh white light. Shadows leapt and twisted. In that momentary glare, she saw them, three figures on the ridge they'd crossed, two perfectly still, observing, waiting. Then darkness crashed back, and the night swallowed everything. Her hands trembled again. This time she didn't hide it. The others regrouped, voices low and edged with nerves. Danner muttered, "Feels wrong, like they're playing with us." Elena glanced at Grady. For once he didn't argue. Far away, a distant boom rolled through the valley. A mortar, thunder. The line between weather and war blurred here. They pulled back toward the ridge, every step heavier than the last. Above them, the stars burned cold and indifferent. As they climbed, Elena felt the photograph in her pocket press against her chest, almost like a heartbeat. She remembered the promise she'd whispered over Daniel's dog tags the day she enlisted. "I'll find out what happened. I'll bring the truth home." She didn't know yet how deep the valley's secrets went, or how much silence could wound. But tonight she felt the first tremor of something shifting, something dangerous and maybe inevitable. And in that fragile, windswept darkness, she understood one thing. Silence wasn't empty. It was listening, waiting. Who fired first, or did anyone fire at all? That question haunted the ridge the next morning, long before the sun burned off the mist. Elena Vasquez crouched on a flat stone, watching dawn creep across the valley floor like a cautious animal. Pale gold light spilled over jagged peaks, warming nothing. Her breath fogged in the chill. Around her, the others packed gear in silence, no jokes, no casual swears. The memory of the flare and those still silhouettes had pulled the arrogance out of even Grady. She sipped lukewarm coffee from a dented thermos, the bitter taste grounding her. The ridge looked harmless now in daylight, just rock and scrub, no ghosts or watchers. But daylight had a way of lying. Captain Rizza had stayed behind with the hello, perched on a safer outcropping. His voice crackled over the radio. "Wind's shifting again. You're on a clock. If the updraft gets worse, extraction will be dicey." Dicey, a word that covered so much. Broken legs on loose shale, an ambush, a sky that suddenly refused to carry you. Grady gathered the squad, forcing confidence into his voice. "We sweep one more sector. Quick in, quick out. Eyes open. If we spook civilians, we apologize and move." Elena studied him, saw the tiny tremor in his jaw, the sleepless lines under his eyes. He'd seen those figures too. They descended along a goat path, the stones shifting under their boots. Below, the village looked smaller, almost fragile. A single goat bleated, the sound startling in the stillness. Corporal Danner walked beside her, his usual swagger muted. He kept his voice low. "You think those were scouts?" She didn't answer immediately. A hawk circled overhead, its shadow gliding over rock. "They weren't farmers," she said finally. He nodded grimly, could have taken the shot. She felt the old ache in her chest. Restraint had been drilled into her bones. A wrong shot could ignite a village, but hesitation carried its own cost. Daniel's cost. The path narrowed, forcing them single file. Elena's thoughts drifted. New Mexico sunsets with Daniel throwing a football. Her mother's rosary beads clicking in anxious prayer the day Elena shipped out. The weight of choices that always felt heavier after the fact. A faint melody rode the wind, then soft, broken notes. A song, children's voices. Her stomach tightened. She raised a hand, halt. They listened. Yes, faint laughter, a song she didn't recognize. But where were the children yesterday? Why did the village seem emptied then, alive now? Danner whispered, "It's a recording." She closed her eyes for a beat. A trick. Someone wanted them to move carelessly. The squad fanned out at the village edge. Huts of sun-baked mud stood crooked and tired. A line of laundry swayed on a rope, colorful shirts dancing in the breeze. But the shirts were clean. Too clean for an abandoned place. Grady signaled, "Sweep fast, don't split more than 20 meters." Elena slipped into a narrow alley, the walls close enough to scrape her shoulders. Her footsteps echoed, too loud. At the alley's end, a metal door hung ajar. Inside, dust motes floated in a single shaft of light. A tin cup rocked slowly on the floor as if nudged by an invisible hand. She scanned the room. No one but her instincts screamed. A sudden pop, quiet but sharp, snapped across the village. Not a rifle, a radio cue. She dropped, pressing her cheek to the cool dirt floor. Through the crack beneath the door, she caught movement, boots, 3 sets, moving too deliberately to be villagers. Her pulse hammered. She mouthed into her comm, barely audible, "Contact, east side." Grady's voice hissed back, "Pull out, regroup." But then a child's giggle, close, high-pitched. She turned her head. A boy of maybe 8 crouched in the corner, wide-eyed, dust in his dark hair. He held a ragged stuffed bear, clutching it like a lifeline. She whispered, "SHHH, stay low." He didn't move, didn't even blink. A shadow crossed the doorway. Heavy boots paused, then retreated. She exhaled shakily and motioned the boy closer. He hesitated, then crawled to her side, silent tears streaking his cheeks. She pointed to the bear, miming safety. The bear had a missing button eye. Daniel once had a toy like that. The memory stabbed her unexpectedly. Voices outside, foreign, clipped. Not locals, not friendly. The boy whispered in broken English, "They make us stay. They wait for soldiers." Her stomach turned cold, a trap. She keyed the comm again. "Ambush confirmed, 3, maybe more, east side." Static, then Rizza's voice. "Wraith, your signal's garbled, say again." Nothing from Grady, nothing from Danner. The boy tugged her sleeve urgently, pointing toward a cracked window in the back. She took his hand. "Quiet, we go slow." Outside, a low rumble built, like distant thunder but metallic. An engine, too, maybe more. She pushed the boy through the window first, then followed, her pack scraping the frame. The dirt outside was damp from last night's dew, leaving boot prints, fresh, large, headed toward the alley. She pressed against the wall, rifle ready. A voice, unfamiliar, echoed faintly through a loudspeaker, foreign words she didn't understand. But the tone was clear, a warning, maybe a demand. The boy clutched her hand tighter. She could feel him trembling. Then another flare arced skyward, bursting pale green this time. A signal. From the ridge, gunfire erupted. Short bursts controlled her squad. Elena's breath came fast, fogging in the cold air. She had seconds to choose, rejoin the firefight and leave the boy, or find a safer route and risk being cut off. She thought of Daniel's photo, of promises, of the way silence had whispered her name last night. "Come on," she whispered to the boy. They darted between huts, the world narrowing to shadows and breath. The gunfire behind her grew louder, then closer. Danner's voice cut through the calm, strained. "They're flanking. We're pinned." She skidded to a stop at the edge of a dry creek bed. The drop wasn't far, but the loose rock could break an ankle. The boy's eyes were wide with fear. She knelt, meeting his gaze. "You trust me?" He nodded once. She jumped first, landing hard, knees screaming. She turned, catching the boy as he leapt. They scrambled along the dry bed, the creek walls sheltering them from sight. Ahead, the creek forked, left toward the ridge, right deeper into the valley. She hesitated. Left risked exposure. Right risked getting lost, or worse. A faint voice crackled in her earpiece, Grady faint, broken. "Ridge cut off Vasquez," then static. She pressed her forehead to the cool stone for a heartbeat, forcing herself to breathe. Choices always felt heavier after the fact, but this one was heavy before. She chose right. The creek bed narrowed, the sky above slicing thinner and thinner. The air smelled of damp earth and something acrid, gunpowder, faint but fresh. The boy stumbled. She steadied him. His small hand in hers was a fragile weight, grounding her. A memory flashed, her and Daniel hiding in the arroyo back home during a thunderstorm, pretending they were commandos. He'd held her hand then too, even though he'd teased her about being scared of lightning. Ahead, the creek opened into a small grove of twisted trees, their leaves whispering secrets in the wind. A shattered truck cab lay on its side, half buried in silt, long abandoned, but fresh footprints surrounded it. She raised her rifle, scanning. A rusted oil drum shifted slightly, wind or someone breathing. A voice, calm and measured, spoke from behind the truck. "Wraith." Her spine went rigid, the same voice from the calm last night. "Step into the open," it said. "No harm if you listen." She pulled the boy behind her, heart pounding so hard it hurt. "Who are you?" she called softly. A pause, then, "Someone who knows what happened to your brother." Her throat went dry. The boy's fingers dug into her sleeve. The truck remained still. No face, no movement, just the voice, smooth and unhurried. "You're being watched from every ridge," it continued. "Your team is expendable to your command. They left Daniel and they'll leave you." Her breath hitched. She wanted to shout, to demand proof, but that would give away her position. The voice shifted tone, almost gentle. "Take the boy. Go north 2 kilometers. There's a safe path." She didn't move, didn't answer. Then a sharp crack split the air, a rifle shot from somewhere above. Bark exploded from a tree trunk near her head. She dove, pulling the boy down, adrenaline roaring. Another shot, close. She crawled backward, keeping low, scanning for muzzle flash. None. When she looked again, the truck was empty. The voice was gone. Only the whispering leaves remained. She gathered herself, trembling. The boy looked at her with wide, questioning eyes. "We're not done," she whispered. She didn't know if she meant the mission, the valley, or the ghosts that had just spoken her brother's name. Somewhere behind them, the gunfire on the ridge faltered, then resumed, desperate and ragged. She adjusted her grip on the rifle in the boy's hand. The path north might be a trap. Staying might be worse. Either way, silence wasn't on their side anymore. It had already spoken. And as the wind rose again, carrying the valley's secrets, Elena felt the weight of a truth she wasn't ready to face. Sometimes, the enemy wasn't just across the ridge. It was the voice whispering doubt inside your own head. What do you do when the voice of your enemy knows your brother's name? Elena Vasquez gripped the boy's hand tighter as dawn's pale light gave way to a hard, unforgiving sun. The creek bed's cool dampness faded, replaced by the brittle heat rising from dry rock. Each step north sent tiny avalanches of gravel skittering down the channel walls. She couldn't shake the words. They left Daniel, and they'll leave you. The boy stumbled on a loose stone, and she caught him before he fell. His breath came in sharp gasps, but he didn't complain. Brave kid, too brave. She paused in a patch of shade, crouching low. Overhead, a hawk traced lazy circles against a washed-out sky, indifferent to firefights and secrets. The valley seemed calm again, like nothing had happened. But that calm felt cruel, like a smile hiding a lie. She unclipped her canteen, offering it to the boy. He hesitated before sipping, dirt streaking his small face. "What's your name?" she asked softly. "Amir," he whispered. "Amir," she repeated, grounding herself in the sound. "You're safe with me." Was he? She didn't know. The calm in her ear hissed with static, then Danner's voice broke through, faint, ragged. Grady's hit pinned West Slope, Wraith, where the transmission died. Elena closed her eyes for a beat. Her chest felt heavy. She could turn back, risk Amir's life, risk walking straight into a kill zone, or keep north, maybe find the path the stranger promised. Neither choice sat right. A breath of wind slid through the creek, carrying the faintest echo, metal on stone. Following, hunting. She whispered to Amir, "Stay close, no matter what." They pressed on, moving in bursts, staying low when the canyon walls widened. The boy's stuffed bear peeked from his pocket, the button eye glinting briefly in the sun. It reminded her of Daniel's toy soldier, missing a leg, always carried everywhere. Memories flickered. Daniel on their porch, guitar in hand, singing quietly after their father's funeral. Daniel convincing her to join the service when she'd wanted to teach history instead. His voice saying, "You'll understand why someday." Now that understanding felt like a knife. The creek bed opened onto a small plateau scattered with boulders. A faint path wound between them, leading toward a cluster of gnarled trees. On one of the rocks, a scrap of fabric fluttered, tan, frayed, army issue. Daniel's unit had worn that pattern. She reached for it, fingers brushing the rough cloth. It was old, sun-bleached, but her chest tightened all the same. Proof, or a cruel plant by whoever whispered her call sign. A low hum grew in the distance, not the steady chop of rotors. A drone, recon. She ducked instinctively, pulling Amir with her under a boulder's shadow. The hum passed, then faded. She exhaled, her heartbeat loud in her ears. Amir looked up at her. They use children. His English was halting but clear enough. She nodded grimly. "I know. They take fathers, make sons watch." His voice cracked. She felt a wave of anger so sharp it steadied her shaking hands. She scanned the horizon. Far to the west, faint dust clouds rose, the firefight still raging. The others were alive, maybe. She tapped her comm again. "Grady, Danner, anyone check in?" "Static." She whispered a curse under her breath. Then a sound behind her, a single pebble rolling. She spun, rifle raised. A man stepped out from behind a boulder, hands raised. His face was weathered, sunburned, a weak stubble shadowing his jaw. He wore no uniform, just dusty cargo pants and a faded scarf. "Easy," he said, voice low. It was the same voice. Her finger tightened on the trigger. "Don't move." "I didn't lie," he said, "about Daniel." The name punched the air from her lungs. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Someone who was there," he replied. His eyes were tired, old in a way age alone couldn't explain. "2 years ago, your brother's unit command used them as bait, drew out insurgents to map weapons caches. Then they cut comms, ordered us to stand down." Her stomach lurched. "That's not—" "It's truth," he said, stepping closer. "I watched him fight until he couldn't. I watched him look up like he was waiting for someone. He said your name before." "Stop," her voice cracked. Amir clutched her sleeve, eyes darting between them. The man lowered his hand slightly. "They'll do the same to you. Grady doesn't know. Rizad doesn't know, but Command does. They need a ghost story to scare the valley quiet again." She wanted to scream, to demand proof, to believe and not believe all at once. Instead, she asked, "Then why warn me?" "Because I was a coward once," he said softly. "I stayed silent, and silence killed him." A distant boom echoed through the valley, artillery or a collapsing wall. The ground trembled faintly. The man glanced toward the west. "Your team can't hold much longer. If you go back now, you die with them. If you take the path north, you can save him, save one at least. The boy, maybe yourself." His words hung heavy in the heat. Elena's throat felt dry as dust. "If I leave them." "They left your brother," he said, "and they'll bury you the same." She stared at him, searching for any flicker of deceit. His eyes held nothing but regret. Then gunfire cracked sharply from the west, a burst, then another, the sound of men calling out, faint but desperate. She cursed under her breath, the choice tearing at her chest. The man stepped back, fatting toward the trees. "Decide quickly." And then he was gone. Amir tugged her sleeve again. "We go." She swallowed hard. Her brother's voice echoed in her memory. "Don't let them decide for you, Lena." She slung her rifle and took Amir's hand. "We're going back." They doubled back along the creek, moving fast but careful, feet slipping on loose rock. Every sound seemed sharper now, the scrape of stone, the hiss of wind. As they neared the plateau overlooking the village, the gunfire grew louder. Smoke rose in thin columns. Through her scope, she spotted Danner, crouched behind a low wall, bleeding from a shoulder wound, firing short bursts. Grady lay prone nearby, moving but sluggish. 2 enemy fighters flanked them from the left, another circling wide. She positioned herself on a ridge, breath slowing. Her scope lined up on the flanker. One shot clean, controlled. He dropped silently. Another shot, second fighter, down. The third paused, scanning the ridge. He didn't see her. She waited for him to move into the open. Her finger squeezed and the rifle bucked gently. Silence followed. Danner's voice broke over the calm, ragged but alive. "Wraith, that you?" "Stay low," she whispered. She guided Amir behind a boulder, then scrambled down toward the squad. Dust clung to her uniform, sweat stung her eyes. She reached Danner first, pressing a bandage against his wound. He grimaced but managed a grin. "Knew you'd be stubborn." Grady looked at her, pain and gratitude flickering across his face. "You didn't leave." She didn't answer, she couldn't. Overhead a drone buzzed faintly. Watching, always watching. They regrouped in the shadow of a broken wall, breaths ragged. Amir crouched close, clutching his bear. Grady's voice was hoarse. "Extraction's a mess. Razaz says the wind's getting worse. We might be stuck." Elena stared at the horizon where the stranger had vanished. His words gnawed at her. If Command had sacrificed Daniel once, what would they do now? Danner broke the silence. "That kid, why's he with you?" She glanced at Amir, then back to Danner. "Because leaving him wasn't an option." A pause. Danner nodded slowly, understanding more than he said. Above them, the sun burned white and unforgiving. The valley lay quiet again, as if it hadn't just tried to swallow them whole. But Elena knew better. Silence wasn't peace here. It was a predator waiting for its moment. And somewhere in that silence, Daniel's ghost was still watching. The night wind cut sharp across the ridge, whistling through broken rebar and twisted steel beams. Somewhere far below, a mortar flared, then faded, a distant heartbeat of war. Lena pressed her cheek against the scope, breath held. Her world narrowed to the faint glow of movement in the valley. She almost didn't see it, the flicker of a flashlight, 3 rapid bursts. A signal, not theirs. Her fingers tightened on the rifle. The code matched one she'd memorized months ago during an intel briefing, one used by their enemies to mark a safe approach route. Someone was guiding them in. Her pulse drummed, a double agent, or worse, someone inside their perimeter. A voice whispered behind her, "You see it too." It was Ramos, his usual joking tone stripped away. His knuckles were white on the edge of the sandbag wall. Command said we're secure, but that's not secure. She exhaled slowly, the breath steamed in the cold. "Don't wake the whole squad," she murmured. "Not yet." He hesitated, then nodded, retreating back into shadow. Silence stretched. The valley below seemed to hold its breath. Lena's mind wandered where she didn't want it to, her father's old voice, the one from years ago on a porch swing in Montana. "Trust is earned, kiddo, but sometimes it's stolen." She had trusted her team, trusted command. And now, that trust felt like a frayed rope, one wrong tug from snapping. A faint crunch of gravel behind her made her spin. Hartman stood there, half-lit by moonlight, his breath ragged. "You weren't supposed to be on this ridge tonight," he said softly. "Rotation was changed." She felt the words like a warning, like a trap. "Funny," she replied, her tone flat. "Nobody told me." His jaw worked. "Maybe they didn't want you here." The implication hung heavy between them. She lowered her rifle slightly but kept her weight on the trigger guard. "Who? They?" "Hartman." He didn't answer. He looked past her toward the valley, then back. His eyes were full of something she couldn't name, regret, guilt, fear. Before she could press him, the radio on his chest crackled, static, then a voice. Faint, urgent, not command's channel, a foreign tongue. Hartman flinched, slapped the dial, killing the noise. Too late. She had heard enough to know. "Tell me you're not," she began. He shook his head violently. "It's not what you think." But it was exactly what she thought. And worse, if Hartman's radio was compromised, then the ambush wasn't coming. It was already here. Down the slope, shadows separated from shadows, 4, maybe 5 figures gliding silently between the rocks. She pulled the scope to her eye. No insignia, no hesitation, professionals. She clicked the safety off. "Hartman," she whispered, "move." He froze, fear. Then footsteps behind them, Ramos again, wide-eyed. "Lena," he didn't finish. A suppressed round hissed past his ear, sparking against steel. The ridge erupted, silent chaos. She dropped one figure with a single shot, the recoil slamming into her shoulder. Another dove for cover. Hartman scrambled backward, his radio clattering to the ground. Ramos dragged him by the collar into a shallow trench. "Are we blown?" "We're not blown," she said, lining up her next shot. "We're lit." The fight was brief, brutal. 2 attackers down, the others melted into the dark. But their message had been delivered. The enemy was inside their lines, and someone had opened the door. When it was over, Lena sat back on her heels, chest heaving. The night was still again, too still. She stared at the fallen figures, then at Hartman's discarded radio. Questions clawed at her throat. Hartman's voice broke the silence. "You don't understand. They have my brother." Ramos cursed under his breath. "Classic story. You sold us out." Hartman's head dropped. "I didn't sell anyone out. I was buying time." Lena wanted to scream, wanted to shake him. Instead, she studied his face, the tremor in his hands, the sheen of sweat on his brow. Fear wasn't always cowardice. Sometimes it was love twisted into something desperate. She looked toward the valley again. Somewhere out there, someone was watching, waiting for them to crumble from within. She couldn't let that happen, not after everything, not after Maria. She gathered her rifle, slung it over her shoulder, and stood. "We're changing the plan," she said quietly. We're ghosts now. No one moves without my say." The men glanced at each other, unsure, but they followed when she stepped into the dark. As they moved, Lena felt the weight of a choice she hadn't spoken aloud. She could report Hartman, follow protocol, and risk the mission collapsing. Or she could carry this secret, bear its poison, and keep her team alive long enough to finish what they came for. The wind gusted, scattering grit across the stones. In that fleeting sound, she imagined Maria's voice again. "Sometimes the right thing isn't clean, Lena. Sometimes it's just less wrong." She pressed on, deeper into shadow. The moonlight caught the edge of her cheek, glinting off a single tear she hadn't realized had fallen. And somewhere far away, the enemy adjusted their sights, believing the ridge was theirs. But Lena waited, and waiting was her art. The desert was too quiet, too clean. Lena crouched low in the hollow of an old drainage ditch, her boots sinking slightly into damp soil left from a rare storm. Above her, clouds moved like silent ships, hiding the moon for long stretches, then revealing it in brief, silver flashes. Each time light touched the valley, she studied the terrain, searching for patterns only she would notice. Ramos's breath was loud in the dark. He kept glancing at Hartman, who sat apart from the group, his head bowed, shoulders hunched. The betrayal wasn't complete, not yet, but suspicion had a way of poisoning even unspoken loyalties. "Should have turned him in," Ramos muttered under his breath. "Command would've." Lena cut him off with a look. "Command would have blown the whole op wide open," she whispered, "and we'd be the ones in body bags." He swallowed hard, the fight draining out of him. Beneath the hard exterior, Ramos wasn't made for hatred. Most soldiers were. They just learned to wear it like armor. A sudden metallic click snapped their attention upward. Lena raised her hand, halting movement. The sound wasn't theirs. It was ahead, somewhere near the burned-out truck they'd marked earlier as a landmark. She motioned for silence and crawled forward on her stomach, feeling the cold grit scrape her elbows. The smell hit her first, burned oil mixed with something sour human. A shadow moved near the truck's undercarriage, too smooth, too deliberate. Then another. 2 figures, maybe 3. They were setting charges, tiny flashes of light betraying their tools. Her throat tightened. They weren't just probing the perimeter. They were laying a trap for the entire convoy scheduled at dawn. She slid back, her heart hammering. "They're setting mines," she mouthed to Ramos. He blinked, furious, scared. "Then we stop them." Hartman stirred, his voice low but urgent. "We can't shoot. They'll know we're here. You set off one firefight and the whole valley closes on us." Lena hesitated. Hartman wasn't wrong, but waiting meant watching her own men drive into an ambush in a few hours. She thought of Maria again, the firefight 2 years ago, the one that still woke her up at night. They'd waited too long then, too. Waited for permission, for clarity, for someone else to make the hard choice. And Maria had paid for it with her life. Her fingers traced the familiar grooves of the rifle's stock. Her breathing slowed. "Cover me," she whispered. Ramos's eyes widened. "You're going out there." "If I take out the charges silently, we live. If I do," she let the unfinished thought hang. She slipped into the night, hugging the ground, her body a ghost against the desert floor. The world seemed to shrink to sound and breath, the distant chirp of a lone night insect, the faint clink of metal on metal ahead. Every inch forward was a memory. Her father teaching her to move silently through Montana woods, Maria teaching her to hold her breath on the exhale, her own voice reminding herself that fear was a tool, not a prison. She reached the first mine, a crude but deadly device wired beneath a jagged piece of steel. Her hands moved instinctively, fingers remembering every EOD briefing she'd ever sat through, every half-forgotten warning. A cut here, a twist there. A whisper of footsteps behind her froze her in place. Not Ramos, not Hartman, too close, too careful. She didn't turn, didn't breathe, just listened. A single bead of sweat slid down her neck. The footsteps stopped inches from her boots. Then nothing. Silence. She took her chance, rolled sideways and came up on one knee, rifle raised. A masked figure loomed above her, caught mid-step. Their eyes met, only for a fraction of a second, but in that moment she saw not malice but purpose, a purpose as sharp and desperate as her own. He lunged first. The struggle was brutal, soundless. Dust flew as they grappled, her fingers clawing for leverage, his hands reaching for her rifle. He was stronger, but she was faster. A twist, a shift of weight, and she slammed his head against the steel frame. He went limp. She dragged him into the shadows, chest heaving, and glanced toward the others. Two more figures were still working under the truck. She could end it now, take the shot, warn Ramos, blow their cover. But then what? Dozens of enemy fighters could be hiding in the hills, waiting for that single spark. Her jaw clenched. She crept forward instead, her knife drawn, moving like water. One takedown, then another, each quiet, precise, a ghost in the dark. When she returned to the ditch, Ramos was staring wide-eyed. Hartman looked away, shame and awe battling on his face. "It's done," she whispered. Ramos's voice cracked. "You how?" She silenced him with a glance. "We move now, before dawn." They slipped deeper into the valley, shadows among shadows. But inside her chest, the war raged louder. She had crossed a line tonight, taken lives not in open battle but in the silence between breaths. Somewhere in that silence, a question lingered. Was she saving her team, or becoming the very thing she feared? The night offered no answer, only the sound of wind scraping over broken earth, and the memory of Maria's laughter echoing where it no longer belonged. The first pink threads of dawn stretched over the horizon, casting the valley in a fragile light that made everything look deceptively calm. Lena moved with deliberate care, her boots leaving faint impressions in the dust as the team crossed an abandoned wadi. Each step felt like walking through a memory she didn't want but couldn't release. Hartman trudged a few paces behind, his eyes fixed on the ground. Ramos stayed closer to Lena now, his earlier anger tempered by awe and exhaustion. The desert wind carried a faint metallic scent, old blood, old battles. It was a reminder. The earth remembered every choice soldiers made on it. Lena signaled for a halt and crouched behind a ridge of sandstone. From this vantage, the enemy's forward outpost was barely visible, a cluster of shattered buildings stitched together by makeshift barricades. Smoke from a dying fire rose in thin spirals, vanishing into the warming air. She raised her scope. Through the glass she saw movement. A boy, no older than 12, sweeping debris from a doorway. A civilian trapped in someone else's war. His thin arms worked silently, his face blank, as if his emotions had been scraped clean by too much loss. Her throat tightened. She thought of herself at that age, Montana summers, bare feet on wooden porch steps, her father's easy laughter. The contrast hurt. "Target," Ramos whispered. She lowered the scope slowly. "Not today." The plan had changed again. Hartman's revelation about his brother had left cracks in everything they thought they knew. Command was compromised, or worse, clueless. The convoy would arrive in 3 hours. They had to find the comm relay feeding intel to the enemy before that happened. But how do you hunt betrayal in silence? They approached the outpost at a crawl, moving with the sun behind them. Lena felt every grain of sand against her palms, every breath burning her throat. The closer they got, the louder the whispers in her mind grew. Maria's voice, the boy's sweeping, her father's warning. At the edge of the ruins, Hartman stopped. "I need to tell you something." Ramos stiffened. Better not be another surprise. Hartman's jaw flexed. The codes they're using, they're not just stolen, they're ours. Command gave them. The words landed like a grenade. Ramos cursed softly, turning away. Lena felt a surge of nausea. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Because they're running something bigger," Hartman said. "Some kind of shadow op. My brother, he's leverage, but it's not just him. They're trading information, playing both sides." The morning light didn't soften the ugliness of it. It made it starker. Lena's mind reeled. If Command was complicit, then the mission wasn't about saving the convoy. It was about exposing a lie so deep it could swallow them all. A noise cut through her thoughts, a cough. The boy from before stood 20 feet away, holding a tin cup. His eyes were too knowing for his age. Lena raised a finger to her lips. He didn't move, didn't flee, just watched her. And then, with a barely perceptible motion, he tilted his head toward the far building, a gesture so subtle it could have been a trick of light. She followed the line of his gaze. A faint glint of metal in a window, a relay antenna half hidden. The boy turned and vanished into the ruins. "Did that just happen?" Ramos whispered. "It happened," Lena said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. They moved toward the building, every step deliberate. Inside, the air smelled of dust and something acrid, burned circuitry. The relay was there, humming softly, wires snaking across the floor. A single guard sat slumped in a chair, half asleep. Lena's finger hovered over the trigger, but something in the way the guard's hand twitched, the exhaustion etched into his face, gave her pause. She stepped closer, silently. His eyes fluttered open just as she pressed the rifle to his temple. He froze, then whispered in halting English, "Please, my family." The words pierced through the armor she'd built around herself. This wasn't an enemy monster, just another person caught in the machinery of war. She gestured for him to stand, keeping the rifle steady. "Move," she said softly. They bound him, silent and efficient, then set to work on the relay. Hartman yanked the main cable. Ramos planted a charge. 2 minutes, Ramos muttered. The guard's breathing quickened, but he didn't struggle. Lena found herself meeting his eyes, dark, human, pleading. When the charge blew, the sound was smaller than she expected, almost polite. Dust rained from the ceiling. Outside, birds scattered in a frantic cloud. But the valley knew. Even without a loud blast, the balance had shifted. Somewhere, someone would feel that silence break. As they slipped back into the desert, Hartman spoke quietly. "They'll know now. Command the enemy, everyone." Lena didn't look back. "Good," she said. "Let them know." For a moment the wind stilled. The dawn was beautiful in a way that felt almost cruel, soft pink light over hard, broken earth. Inside, Lena felt the old ache of loss and the dangerous bloom of something like hope. The boy's silent gesture, the guard's plea, Hartman's guilt, it all whispered the same truth. Even in betrayal and blood, there were still choices. She tightened the strap on her rifle and moved on, because choices meant there was still a way forward, even if the path was nothing but shadows. The convoy's engines were still miles away, but Lena could already feel the hum of them under her skin. A low, distant vibration carried through the desert floor. The sun was fully awake now, casting long, stark shadows over the valley's jagged bones. Ramos adjusted his pack straps, his voice a rasp. "We're running out of time." Hartman didn't answer. He kept scanning the horizon, jaw tight, as if searching for his brother's ghost. They'd bought themselves a few hours by destroying the relay, but it wasn't enough. Whoever had fed the enemy their codes wouldn't need long to improvise. And Lena knew, deep down, the ambush wasn't over. It was simply quieter now, waiting. She led them along a narrow ravine carved by ancient floods, its walls painted with streaks of mineral red. The heat was already climbing, a heavy weight pressing against their backs. Every sound carried, the click of a loose rock, the soft hiss of sand shifting beneath boots. Halfway through the ravine, she stopped. Something was wrong. The silence wasn't just silence, it was staged. No insects, no birds, just a hollow, waiting stillness. She raised a fist. Ramos froze mid-step. Hartman's hand hovered near his sidearm. Then a single distant crack, not gunfire, metal against stone, a signal. Shadows burst from the ravine walls. Lena dove, rolling behind a boulder as suppressed rounds sparked against the stone. Ramos dropped low, returning fire in controlled bursts. Hartman scrambled, dragging himself behind cover, his breath coming fast and shallow. The ambush was surgical, efficient, practiced. Whoever was out there wasn't improvising. They'd planned this spot, this moment. Lena peered over the rock, her heartbeat hammering against her ribs. The enemy wasn't trying to kill them outright. Not yet. They were hurting them, pushing them toward the ravine's choke point where escape would be impossible. Her mind raced. Choices, always choices. Fight here and die, or move deeper, risk being trapped. Smoke, she hissed. Ramos yanked a grenade from his belt, yanked the pin and tossed it. White plumes billowed, filling the ravine with a blinding haze. Move, Lena shouted. They sprinted through the smoke, coughing, half-blind. Gunfire cracked behind them, wild now, less precise. A rock shard sliced her cheek. She didn't stop. The ravine opened suddenly into a sunlit plateau scattered with boulders and scrub. Exposed, vulnerable, but alive. Hartman collapsed behind a rock, gasping. They'll follow, we can't outrun them. Lena scanned the terrain, a ridge line to the west, higher ground, a place to make a stand. She met Hartman's eyes, haunted, guilty, but burning now with something else. Resolve. We're not outrunning them, she said quietly. We're choosing where we fight. They scrambled up the ridge, lungs burning, legs screaming. Behind them, shadows moved through the smoke, shapes emerging like phantoms. At the top, Lena dropped prone, her rifle braced against a rock. She watched the first figure break through the haze, a disciplined fighter scanning, searching. Another followed, then another. She steadied her breath, exhaled, squeezed the trigger, one down, the others scattered for cover. Ramos returned fire beside her, his curses sharp and desperate. Hartman reloaded, his hands trembling, but not from fear this time, from determination. Between bursts of gunfire, Lena's mind slipped, back to Montana woods, to Maria's laughter, to the boy's silent gesture. To her father's words, sometimes it's not about winning. It's about holding the line so someone else gets through. The convoy, the men and women who didn't even know they were walking into death, she wasn't going to let that happen. The fight stretched into eternity. Bullets chipped stone inches from her face. Sand stung her eyes. Ramos groaned, a graze along his arm, but kept firing. Hartman shouted warnings, his voice hoarse. Then a lull, an unnatural pause. Through her scope, Lena saw the enemy regrouping behind a cluster of boulders. One of them raised a hand signal. A larger force was coming. She felt the fear rise, cold and sharp, but beneath it something steadier took root. Hope, not the naive kind, the hard, bitter kind that survives only because surrender isn't an option. She pressed her cheek to the stock, closed her eyes for a heartbeat, and whispered, barely audible, "Maria, guide my hands." The wind shifted, the smoke below began to thin, and in the distance the faint, blessed hum of engines. The convoy, still far but closer now. Lena opened her eyes, her jaw set. They weren't out yet, but as long as she breathed, as long as silence could be broken by a single shot, she wasn't letting the valley claim another soul. She took aim again, the desert sun blazing behind her, and waited for the next shadow to move. The plateau was a furnace now, heat rolling off the stone in waves that shimmered like ghosts. Lena's throat was raw, her cheek still bleeding, but her hands were steady as she adjusted her grip on the rifle. Below, the enemy was patient, circling through the rocks, closing the noose. Ramos crouched beside her, pale but defiant, a strip of torn cloth wrapped tight around his wounded arm. "They're trying to pin us," he said, his breath ragged. Hartman checked his last magazine, jaw clenched. "They'll overrun us before the convoy even hits the ridge." Lena's gaze drifted to the horizon. The hum of engines was stronger now, a fragile thread of salvation, but so far away, too far. She closed her eyes for a moment, and there it was again, Maria's laughter echoing from a porch swing that would never creak again. Her father's voice, calm, unyielding, reminding her that courage wasn't loud. It was quiet. It was choosing to stand, even when no one would ever know. A flicker of movement snapped her back. An enemy fighter broke cover, sprinting low toward a better angle. She dropped him with a single shot. The echo rolled across the valley like thunder. More figures advanced, bolder now. Rounds cracked overhead, chipping stone, sending fragments into her hair. Ramos fired controlled bursts, gritting his teeth against the pain. Hartman muttered something under his breath, a prayer or a curse. Lena crawled to a better vantage point. Her chest felt tight, not from fear but from the weight of choice pressing down. She could order a retreat, maybe save herself and Ramos, leave the convoy to its fate, or she could hold, risk everything. She thought of the boy sweeping the doorway, of the guard who whispered please, of Hartman's trembling hands. Even in a world carved by betrayal, there were still slivers of humanity worth saving. She chose. "Ramos," she said quietly, "when I say go, light your last smoke. Hartman, set your mag for covering fire. We're not moving until they see us." Ramos blinked. "You want them to see us?" "They'll focus on us," she said, "not the convoy." They exchanged a look, fear and respect mingling, and nodded. Lena waited. The convoy's hum was closer now, a faint vibration through the stone. She could almost see the dust trails on the far ridge. She rose just enough for her silhouette to catch the light. The enemy spotted her instantly, shouts echoed, rifles barked. She squeezed the trigger, each shot deliberate, not for numbers but for time. Ramos popped the smoke, a plume of white blooming like a defiant flag. Hartman laid down fire, his voice breaking with a raw, desperate yell that was part rage, part redemption. The valley became chaos, shadows rushing, gunfire snapping, smoke curling in the relentless sun. But amid the noise, Lena felt a strange, calm clarity. Every movement slowed, every sound sharpened. The world narrowed to the weight of her rifle, the pull of the trigger, the beat of her heart. The first rumble of engines reached the plateau's edge. The convoy appeared, a line of battered trucks and armored vehicles cresting the ridge. The sight was almost beautiful. The enemy realized too late. Their focus shifted, panicked. A few turned to flee. Others fought harder, desperate to salvage their ambush. Lena fired again and again, each shot buying seconds. The convoy's guns opened up, tracer rounds slicing the air. The enemy line buckled, then shattered. When it was over, the plateau was silent except for the wind. The smoke thinned, revealing the wreckage, shattered stone, abandoned rifles, the scars of battle etched into the earth. Ramos slumped against a rock, his face gray with exhaustion but alive. Hartman sank to his knees, his rifle slipping from his hands. His eyes met Lena's, haunted, grateful, ashamed. She lowered her weapon, her arms trembling now that the adrenaline had drained away. A convoy medic rushed up the slope, shouting, but Lena barely heard him. She was staring at the horizon, where the boy's gesture and Maria's laughter lived together in memory. Ramos's voice broke the silence, hoarse and soft. "We made it." Lena didn't answer at first. She let the wind carry the weight of what they'd done, of what they'd lost, of what they'd saved. Then finally she spoke, quiet, almost to herself. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak," she said. "It simply acts." The words hung in the warm air, fragile and enduring. As the convoy rolled past, dust swirling around her boots, Lena stood alone for a moment on the sunlit ridge. She felt the ache of her bruises, the sting of her cut, the hollow space where Maria's voice had been. And in that silence, the silence she had turned into the enemy's defeat, she let herself breathe, one steady breath, then another. She slung her rifle over her shoulder and stepped down from the ridge, leaving only footprints and the whisper of wind to tell the valley she had ever been there.